it's recording. Yes. Okay. Okay, so we'll speak about why React renders. It's really important to understand it because we need to understand the flow that how memoization take apart inside React in any program language. Then we will understand what is memoization and what it does. Then we go inside into React concept that is use memo and React.memo, or in other name memo. We understand what is the difference, what they can do. Then we'll look about the pros and cons. There's no, perfect scenario in developing. We also have a better not. And then we have the conclusions. Okay, so let's start about why React re-renders. So maybe we can talk about a lot of topics in why it renders, but let's go through about the main ones. The first, that's to updating the UI in the real time, right? When I do some change in the UI, I put some input and I clicked, I want to see it immediately. That's what React gives us, and that is it's the main thing about it, right? I want the code to be re-rendered to have the actual snapshot that I need to use. But how it goes? It goes by that React basically update the UI when we have a state change. React doesn't re-render by itself. It's some state behind the scenes. It can be also context. It can be also something that in the mechanism of React, or basically we call it state. So that's make it to re-render. And important to know that when component render, all their descendants are also rendered. So if I'm the parent and I do some change in me, my kids also will re-render because they want to know if I have some change, maybe the change is related to them. But an extra point here that not everyone super sure about it, not the entire React component is rendered in every render. What it renders is the parent that has the change and its children. If the parent of the parent doesn't have any change in that particular action, it will not re-render. So I create a simple code, and we go through about the project that I created step by step to understand memoization concept. I did it in screenshots and in videos to make it easier by the flow. And I will explain every line, even though it's very, very obvious and simple for you, but it's important to understand the whole lecture. So we have the counter component. That will be our main component. Yes, I have in this application an app component, which inside we have some header that has no logic, and I have the counter component. So this counter component has a state of a counter and is initialized to 0. I have a use effect that has a color of orange. If you can see, ampersand, ampersand, the C describes that it will be in color and it will be in the end orange. So we understand that if we see the console log, it will be in orange. And we don't have dependency array, which means that this use effect will run in every re-render of the code, right? If you have an empty dependency array, it means that it will run only one time. And if you have inside a variable or state, it will render only when this code will run only if this dependency array has changed. We have on-click handler method, which changed the counter and increased it by 1. We have in the return, in the JSX, we have a display counter, which I will not display it in this lecture, but basically display counter holds only text that say counter equal to. That you will see in the next slide. And I have a button that I took it for Material UI just to put it on click handler inside. And the button, when I will click it, basically will increase the counter. So that's what we have. I talked about that we have the bar, the main bar from outside, from the app that I rendered with the counter. And below the bar, I have the counter is 0, which is related to display counter component. And I have the increase button. So that's what we currently have inside counter component. So let's see this video, how it should work. So I have this counter, and if you can see, I will pause the video, you see the console logs in the side. We have two logs, one related to display counter, and the other one related to the counter component. So every render will see it in the console logs in the sides. Just I want to ask you to be focused about what happened, and basically it will be intuitive for you how we click the button, how the renders happens, and how the counter is increasing super fast. Just look the logs and the colors. Look the counter, how fast it goes. I will refresh. I see also how it looks, how it works fast. The counter is going super fast. And basically, that's what I want, right? That's what React does. So I want to add more logic to this application. I want to now to calculate a prime numbers between basically two, the given number that the user choose. And that's a component that has heavy calculation. To calculate prime number is not like 2 plus 2. It takes time. And that's, so let's look at the code. Again, I will go one by one so all of you can understand the code. So in line number 9, we have this prime function, which calculates if the given number is a prime number. I have in line 28 the declaration of the function that gets from outside the props toggle. I have a state selected number that initialized to 100, and that's I did to demonstrate what happened in heavy calculations, because the React system is strong, so it can calculate fast some stuff. But when we think about the 100 prime number between 1 and 2 to 100, it takes more time than a second. Now we have a use effect that declare that this number is changed, and we see this console log in red. And then from line 37 to 42, we basically see the array that and the for loop that checked if this number is a prime, and if it is, push it into array. Okay. Then we have a text that will display in the screen that says the length and how many prime numbers inside it, and all of that will return in the JSX code here. The important thing that you need to understand here is just line 54, which 54 says that if toggle is true, make the border of the text field to red, and if it's false, make it to blue. And in line 63, you see the text that I put outside, which display in more convenient way in this JSX code. So basically, I will add the prime component into the counter component. So I had the toggle in line 11, which initial to false. I have in line 20 the set toggle that every time that I click in the button, it will change from true to false, which means that every time that I will click the button to increase the value, the border will change the color. So that's how we can track about the renders, if we could. And in line 28, just return the primes with the toggle inside. Now, what do you think that's going to be happened? Right, we are React developers, we know it works. So let's see. So I demonstrate here that I have the new component. We see all the 3 renders that we have. We have a new one red, it's the prime component. Now let's try to increase the number. Take a bit of time, that's okay. Let's try to increase. Takes time because it's heavy calculation. It makes sense because it's really heavy. And we see the renders, but if we click it on increase, something weird happened. I click on increase. Look how long it takes. Look how the counter is stuck. Weird. Super weird. And why it's happened? I tried to do a component that is not related to counter at all. But I do see weird behavior here. I click on counter that is not related to nothing, and it's worked super fast before, and it's stuck. So why it's happened? So in the first I talked about why React re-renders, and I said that's when the parent is rendered, all this child is rendered also. So every time that I click on the increase button, the prime component runs again and again and again and again, and do the calculation of the prime number between 1 to 100 every time, every click. And that's something that killing the application, killing the memory of the application. The user can feel that the UI is basically stuck. So it's bad. It's really bad, and we need to find a solution. So I think that you already understand that the solution is memoization. So how memoization will help us here? So what is memoization? So memoization is a technique for spinning up application by caching the result of expressing function calls and returning them when the same inputs are used again. In simple way, or in our example, basically I don't want to recalculate every time the prime numbers. They the same, I didn't change the values. I don't want to recalculate it, even though that the prime component is a child of the counter component. I don't want to this function will recalculate. So how can I do it? I can use in React, use memo. I know that we have it in our code a lot, and I know that the usage is not super intuitive, but use memo is a risky thing that we need to understand and to know how to use it. Basically, we understand about the pros about it, but then we go about the cons also. Just in a comment, we don't use it right in every place in Automation Studio. Okay, so what useMemo does? useMemo does is saving the result in a cache memory, which means that if now I have this heavy calculation of the prime, I will have it. I can save it in the cache memory of the application, and then I can have it immediately without recalculate it. It will avoid render the variable that holds the cached information. Reference types are not creating again means that in JavaScript, we are familiar that we have a primitive types and reference types. If now I have a reference type and I refresh the page, we all know that he has a new pointer, right? He has a new pointer. It's not the same array that it was before the render. So useMemo helps me to say to the React, hey, maybe I'm an array, but I have the same pointer that the last one, so you don't need to re-render me. I'm the same thing. And we can have extremely performance change. So before using useMemo, let's look at line 37 to 42. That's the thing that we will wrap all primes. That's what we have before, and we saw the flow really bad. After, we have this. We have useMemo, which opened in a function, and we have a dependency array, which we have the selected number inside in the dependency array. What it means, if the selected number is not changed, please remember me as what I am. That's it. So let's see it in action. Something that I forgot to mention. I entered in line 37 a console log. I make this calculation with memoization functionality, and that will execute only with this code runs, right? So if we go to the next slide, we can see in the top that we have, I make this calculation again from the prime component. I have the display counter render, and prime neck render. So now I show you that I have this one-time calculation. So basically, if I do a calculation and I increase the prime numbers, it will appears again in the console logs because it happens again when I do it. But when I click increase, I don't see the log. And I think it happened fast. Let's see again. The counter is not dependent anymore about what we have in the prime numbers. The counter is super independent, and And the prime, if the prime needs this heavy calculation, we don't have other choice, but the counter is derived from it. So that's good. That's what we want to achieve here. And then with that use, the user is not feeling that they use the UI stack in every action that he did. Okay. So you should tell me, Omer, but you show me this use memo, and it has the dependency array. It's really similar to use effect. Use effect also, it's a bunch of code that is not execute if something that in the dependency is not changed. And basically, in intuitive way, I feel like it's the same thing. So what is the difference? What happened to maths? Okay, so what is the difference? Use memo is saving the result. So use memo inside the variable that holds the use memo, basically saving the result that I want to save. Let's say, for example, that I want to do this prime calculation in prime component and propagate it up to some parent component in the high level of the application, or put it in some use context. The promise that this information is correct is coming from use memo and not from use effect. Use effect just execute the code when something changed. The second point, sorry, is that use memo is executed in the first render cycle, which it's different from use effect that it's happened in the end of the render cycle, and I will explain. So let's go back to line of code, and I will explain it in code. So let's think that I have this use memo here and the use effect. When this code runs for the very first time, if we're thinking about use effect, all the code will run but not use effect. And by the end, after all component has rendered, we add goes and run use effect. Use effects happened after the component is rendered. And use memo, when the component starts to render, in line 36, this line will be read and will be happen. And that's I forgot the word. That's important because if we have a data that people need to use and it needs to be a reliable one, so that's like graphs, let's say that I have a graph, and in the first time that I load the graph, I see the columns 0, and then you're familiar that they in 1 second they go up. That's something that maybe is use effect, because you read the data was nothing, and I got the information, I have the columns. So I have a truthy data, and that's something that use memo can help me to achieve. And if we are talking about render cycles, in use memo I run 1, and in use effect I run 2 times. And that's something different that we want to achieve, and we want to basically avoid of unusage re-renders. So that's why we have in this scenario will prefer to use memo and not use effect. Now we talk about use memo, and use memo is related to variables. So what is React.memo? React.memo basically is to memorize a component, entire component. If I have a logic that I want to save as is, and I don't want this component render at all, even if it's a kid of some parent, I can use memo. In the example that we saw about the prime component, the component has rendered, but the bunch of code that wrapped in use memo is not. So what React memo does, it's saving the last snapshot of the component in the cache memory. It's really the same like use memo, just on components. It memorized the entire component. It's like memorized, but in software engineering we say memoized. It should not be re-rendered in every render cycle. And it also called pure component because it has one thing to do, and that's why we want to divide it from the renders. Okay. So a classic usage for using memo is graphs, is API calls, heavy API calls, and database calls. That's actions are really heavy, that takes time. It's objects of arrays, and it's really difficult every time to load it, for the React system. So I create this display graph component, which I have the use effect that will display in blue about this component. I have in the JSX some chart that I returned, and that's it. So where memo take in action, memo takes in action in the number 24, 924. I just need to wrap the display graph with memo, and it looks like this. Now I have this component memoized. So I also have in line 5 data in excess that comes from outside. And basically, after I put the data inside, and let's say that is static data, so it shouldn't be changed at all. I don't should to see this render again, the console log of graph, the graph component has rendered. I don't need to see at all. So I take the data. Now we are in the counter component. I take the data, which is arrays of objects and arrays, and I have the excess, which is arrays of objects. And in line 54, I passed it to display graph component. So what we are expecting now, we're expecting now that in the first render cycle, we'll see the console log in blue, and that's it. So here our graph. So let's see how it looks. We'll have the graph and all the things that we have before. We have the logs. Here's the new log. Let's do some change in this application. So in prime component, nothing happened, just the prime, because the prime is a child and is not a parent, so it renders only itself. The counter is the parent, and something weird happened. Graph component has rendered. What should I explain now? I said that it should not be rendered, right? So again, so we use memo. What happened? So basically, we talked about that in JavaScript, arrays and objects are reference types. And here, I didn't wrap data and access with use memo. So every time that I pass this prop to display graph, every time that the parent, which is counter component, is rendered, data and access have a new pointer. This new pointer says every time to the memo component to display graph, hey, I have a new data. I have a new data. It's not the same. So what we need to do, we need to wrap data and access with use memo, and that we can promise that the data would go inside will be the same pointer. It can be dynamic also. It can be comes from database. It can come by from API calls. By the end, only when this data will change, the pointer will change. If it will change, stay as is, it will have the same signature, the same pointer, and we will avoid the render. So now it will be nice to see how it works. So after I wrapped the inside information, which is memo, I have this in the first render cycle, but when I'm clicking now, I'm not seeing anymore. Of course, that's not related. I don't see anymore the graph component rendered. So basically, I divided the graph component from the entire logic. So you can say to yourself, wow, let's up everything with memo and use memo. It's like a magic solution. So why, right? It's like, it sounds like this. So no, big no. And I will explain. It's too good to be true, so maybe it's not true. Use memo, you need to know how to use it, and also in memo. If I have, for example, a component that holds only a picture, that's the component, existence to use to display some pictures. I wrap it with memo. Memo holds a cache memory in our application, and to load picture for the mechanism of React is super fast. It's not a heavy usage. So if I will take a lot of unusage scenarios and I use memo and memo inside them, let's say I do in use memo 2 + 2 or 2 × 2. If I wrap it in use memo, it will save and take place in my application in the cache memory, something that I don't need. I don't need because React mechanism can do it faster than that. I can, by the end, harm the performance because I caching everything we use memo and memo. So let's talk about the pros and the cons and understand it maybe in deeper way. So the pros is saving the last value. So if you're talking about use memo, we are saving the value of, I don't know, of the prime numbers that we have now. And if we're talking about memo, we are saving the result of the entire component snapshot, basically saving the snapshot of component and saving the snapshot of the specific code. The performance, we can extremely change it, as we saw here, if we use it right. The user experience is a crucial clue to understand that we need to use memo. If we understand and if we are advanced developers and we have an experience and we know that that I use now API call, or I use a DB call, or I use some graphs, maybe it's a clue for me to use memo. And if I have a prime calculation or a heavy calculation like that, maybe it's a clue for me to use memo. But basically, React, you need to do it when you know that you need to do it. So let's talk about the cons. So cons, this extra cargo in the cache memory, as I explained, if we do it in the wrong way, we just can harm the application instead of getting the advantages. The performance we can damage, as I explained, and if we use it in wrong scenarios, we don't use it right. We don't use this tool right. It's not what they ask us to do. So what are the conclusions here? The conclusions is use it only when you need it. As I said, if I have a graph or API call or some function that really stacks the UI, that's something that I need to take action where the user can feel it. If the UI is stacked, if I can do something else after I do this action, it's something that I say, hey, maybe I need to use memo here. Maybe I need to change the structure to make it work with use memo. It's the biggest clue. Something I want to add, because I didn't say it in the previous slide. When React released this version number 16, React.memos go outside, the wrapping component. And the developers of React says, let's wrap all the components with React memo. I think is the better approach if you have it. And then they realize that it's killing the performance. And that's what connected to what I said, that I don't need to hold an image inside the memo. I need to hold complex thing inside memo and complex thing inside use memo. I don't want to kill the memory that I have in my application, not for a reason. So we need to use it, as I said, in heavy calculations like graphs, API calls, and database calls. And if it's if it's too good to be true, maybe it's not. So you should consider an advice with some people if it's the right approach or not. And that's it. Thank you. Questions? You have any questions? I'm not sure. Can you hear me, Narendra?
Yes, we can. It was
You have
good
any question?
session. Thank you, Amar. No.
You have here any questions?
No, thank you. It was great.
Speechless.
It was very clear.
Was it clear?
Thank you, Omer.
Thank you. So have an amazing day. Thank you, everyone. I will share. I will share the video with all of you and the slides, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
לא.
כי הרפרנס כל הזמן משתנה שם בכל מניה הרינדר.
איפה?